They started sending out kind of feelers to clubs everywhere they could probably find an address of. There was a club in Montreal called the Laugh-In. That was one club that responded. What they got back was sort of a nicely worded, "Don't call us, we'll call you" letter. But it closed with, "If you're ever in town, look us up." They took that to mean that's an invitation. So they get there and the club owners were like, "Oh, hi guys." Like, they weren't expecting them. They were not expecting them. And they said, "Well, you're here. We'll get you some gigs." It went on from there. I mean, it could have been a very different story.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock. Conversations with authors, musicians, and insiders revealing the stories behind classic rock's greatest songs, albums, and artists. I'm Eric Senich. Before we get started, if you want to get 15% off some great classic rock merchandise at oldglory.com, do so and use the code BookedOnRock. The link is in the show notes or at bookedonrock.com under My Deals. Tons of stuff on there, and not just music. We're talking movies and a whole bunch of other stuff. So check it out, oldglory.com. All right. Now on to our returning guest, Tim Durling. He is the author of On Record, the April Wine album review. Tim, great to see you again.
Great to see you, Eric. Always a pleasure coming on. And I know this is quite different. There's something quite different this time around.
I'm going to thank you before we get into the questions. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this book. It was a thrill for me, man. It's the first for me. You were asking me before we recorded. You were assuming that.
Yeah, I just assumed you must have been in somebody's book before, but I guess not. No, my pleasure, man. It was great. Yeah, if I know somebody's a fan of whoever I'm doing a book on, I'm going to ask them.
And this is a great band. Why choose this particular band? I know you like the Underdogs. I know, you've done Sammy Hagar, you've done Fleetwood Mac, but a lot of your books are those bands that deserve more attention than they've gotten.
Yeah, completely. I mean, in Canada, April Wine is a little bit better, well, quite a bit better known than they would be in the States. I think in the States, they're sort of on that level of and I can't think of a band that I can compare them to, but they had a certain amount of success at the turn of the 80s with Harder, Faster and Nature of the Beast. But in Canada, they had a really strong run for about 15 years. Then they came back and they in the early 90s and they had another gold record, and they've been a perennial touring band up here. And I just looked around and like I've said before, there didn't seem to be any books like this on April Wine, and the fact that they've had 16 studio albums, I think that's more than most people know, certainly outside of Canada. So I wanted to highlight. I thought it was time that I highlighted them. It's actually the first, being Canadian myself, it's actually the first Canadian band I've done a book on. But it just kind of works out. And another reason that I wanted to do one on April Wine is that they're about the only rock band I can think of that went on to some international renown, that started in the easternmost part of Canada, which is where I live. So there's roots here in this neck of the woods in the Atlantic provinces, which is pretty rare. There's April Wine and there's Anne Murray. That's about it as far as like internationally known artists, right, to come out of Canada. So I like the band anyway. I just think it's pretty cool that they've got roots in this neck of the woods, because most big bands that come out of Canada, they're either from Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver, the big centers. Now April Wine did relocate to Montreal, but they started in Nova Scotia, which is the next province over for me.
It's amazing. Nova Scotia. Yeah. Give us the April Wine 101 course, because I'm sure people watching this know the name April Wine, but they may not know really much other than, the few hits, especially those here in the States. So how did they form? When did they form?
Yeah, they formed all the way back in 1969, and the band, almost completely different than the picture that's on the cover. Like the picture that's on the cover of the book is like their best known lineup, the 5-piece lineup that was together from 78 through like 84. But in the beginning, it was Myles Goodwyn, the late Myles Goodwyn, who was the main songwriter, lead singer, and guitarist, who wrote the majority of April Wine's material. but he joined a band that was formed by three Henmans. So you had Richie Henman on drums, you had Jim Henman on, I think, bass, and David Henman on guitar. And for the life of me, I cannot get it straight in my head which two of those guys were brothers and which one was a cousin, but that's how it works. So Myles basically joined the Henmans, who had kind of had an existing thing going. And of course, Myles eventually emerged as the leader and the primary songwriter. And one by one, like the Henmans kind of dropped off, and then other people came into the band. So they released their first album back in 1971. And it's the first of three albums that came out in Canada only. It wasn't released internationally. Their releases were sporadic in the U.S. They had records out on various labels, but it wasn't on a consistent basis. So what really changed for them is when they signed to Capitol Records in 1978, and they put an album out called First Glance, which was actually their seventh album. But that contained the song Roller, which was their first big hit. And that got them on some really big tours. And from then on, they had a run of albums that were successful in the US. They had Harder, Faster, which had I Like to Rock. That was a gold record for them in the US. And then, of course, their biggest success was 1981 with The Nature of the Beast, which ended up being a million seller. That had Sign of the Gypsy Queen and Just Between You and Me, two of their best known songs there. And because of that, in 1981, they ended up being the very first Canadian act played on MTV. So on MTV's first day, I think they played live clips of both of those songs that I just mentioned. Unfortunately, that U.S. success, it's been said many times. I've said it many times that it's not easy for Canadian acts to break into the U.S. and stay there, and it's really difficult. And only a few have done it, and April Wine were no exception. That they had their moment, and then it just kind of became a Canada only thing. Although I'm happy to report that in the recent months, they have gotten out in front of a lot more people and into the States, because they got that opening slot on the Triumph Reunion tour. And I actually caught one of those shows. We can get into that later.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, so yeah, they've got 16 records, and all very different, and a lot of different sounds over the years. Like they changed a lot from, if people think they know two or three songs by April Wine and they listen to that very first album, they probably wouldn't even know it was the same band. Like, it's a very different thing.
Yeah, Myles has a lot to do with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Myles was not a primary songwriter on that first album, nor was he the primary vocalist. So once that became established, they started to sound more and more like the band that the majority of people would come to know. But they're just a good, solid rock band. And they have, up here in Canada, they probably have a dozen songs that are radio staples on classic radio, be it like hits radio or rock radio. And they were able to bridge those two worlds very, very successfully. So it's surprising to me that there hadn't been a book that just talked about their music, but I'm more than happy to be the guy that brings it to people. Although it is a panel discussion book, like my Y&T, Kansas, and Night Ranger books, where I've got a bunch of different people contributing, yourself included. So I've got a lot of different opinions and a lot of different points of view coming in from people that got into the band way early, or people that got into the band way later, listening to the same music, answering the same question. So it's always great to get those differing opinions in, and I learned some things along the way, and always deepens my appreciation, because every time I go to do one of these books, I've got to, really buckle down and listen to the catalog a lot and make sure that at any given time I can answer a question about any song on any album. I need to have it. So, I've just always, like, since I got into this band, they've always been one of my favorite, certainly Canadian bands. And I think if I was to rate, they're just one of my favorite bands in general.
One of the most fascinating stories in the book is that April Wine's career may have taken off because of a misread letter.
Yeah, I mean, this band was, they formed in Waverly, Nova Scotia, which is outside of Halifax. I mean, Halifax is a pretty big Canadian city. A lot of people, a lot of big bands, if they play the east coast of Canada, if they play east of Montreal, Halifax is usually where they play. But, that's a smaller circuit, so they wanted to branch out. So they started sending out kind of feelers to clubs everywhere they could probably find an address of. I mean, this is 1970, so it's not like you could just go online and, you know, so I don't know where the, industry trade publications, but whatever it is, there was a club in Montreal called the Laugh In, and that was one club that responded to them. Now, from what I've read, my understanding is that what they got back was sort of a nicely worded "Don't call us, we'll call you" letter. But it closed with, "If you're ever in town, look us up." And they took that to mean that's an invitation. So they all piled in. I'm picturing an old like Ford Econoline van,
Yeah.
no windows. They just piled into that thing with drums and guitars and amps, and Halifax to Montreal is not a short drive. So I don't know how long it would be. Somebody out there can do the math, but they would have had to make a lot of stops for gas and bathroom breaks and all that stuff. So they get there and the club owners were like, "Oh, hi guys," like they weren't expecting them. They were not expecting them. So but they kind of took pity on them, put them up, and they said, "Well, you're here, um and they play, we'll get you some gigs." And it went on from there. I mean, it could have been a very different story, but yeah, I mean, Montreal kind of became their adopted hometown at that point. Even all the way through the early part of the 80s, they were thought of as a Montreal band. But we here in the East Coast, we know.
That's right.
But yeah, that's how it started. It was it was
What a
kind
great
of a
story.
misunderstanding. Yeah, yeah. I bet there's probably a lot of rock and roll stories start that way. Some unexpected thing happens or something is misunderstood. Like one of my favorite little bits of information, I don't know why I always think of this, but Electric Light Orchestra, their very first album is self-titled. It's called Electric Light Orchestra. But if you get early copies of it that came out in North America, it's called No Answer.
Okay.
And the reason that it's called No Answer is somebody from the UK was calling the US record label and saying, "What?" Or maybe it was the other way around. Somebody from the US was calling the UK label saying, "What is the record called?" And they didn't hear them. They goes, "No answer." So that's what they called the album. They said, "No, the album's called No Answer."
I
But
love those
there
stories.
was literally no answer. So that's
No
why
answer.
you get some copies of it that don't have any title and some that do.
Many fans, they point to 75 Stand Back as the album where the band really, they find their identity. But let's first talk about the first three albums. So the 71 debut on record from 72 and Electric Jewels from 73. So, if somebody only knows April Wine from their late 70s, early 80s hits, would you recommend they start with these first three or jump ahead, then come back?
I'd say if you want to listen to an older album, I'd say start with Stand Back.
All right.
Because like I said, those first three albums, especially that first one, they're very eclectic. First one's very folky in places and very eclectic, and it sounds like what it is. It's a bunch of guys in the studio for the first time. They don't really know what kind of band they want to be, and they're very much wearing their influences on their sleeves. There's everything from Crosby, Stills and Nash to there's Hendrix, there's Zeppelin, there's Moody Blues, there's all kinds of stuff. And it's not, young bands don't always hide their influences very well. It's very obvious. So what you end up with is a bunch of songs. You're like, well, what kind of band are they trying to be? And like I said, Myles Goodwyn being the recognizable vocal, he only sings, I think, on 3 songs on this record. I think David Henman sings. It's either David or Jimmy that sings lead on most of it. So it doesn't sound like April Wine either. It's like listening to the first 3 Journey albums where Greg Raleigh is the singer. If you didn't know his voice, you'd be like, well, who is this? It doesn't sound like Journey. But there's one song on the first album that did get them some airplay in Canada. And lo and behold, it's a Myles Goodwyn song called Fast Train. And it's a pretty cool little song. And it's the only song that went on to have any kind of life on like compilations and things like that. So that was a minor hit in Canada. And that was probably enough for their label to say, okay, let's give them another shot. And so the second April Wine album in Canada was called On Record. In the US, it was the first thing that people got a taste of. So a lot of people think it's their debut album because it was released in the US with a different cover and it's just self-titled. And right off the bat, they scored a hit. with their cover of a Hot Chocolate song called You Could Have Been a Lady. Now, this song went all the way to #2 in Canada, and it's one of their biggest hits ever. In the US, it peaked at 31 or 32. So it actually did break the top 40 in the US, which is pretty rare for a Canadian band. It was on a smaller label called Big Tree Records. And unfortunately, at that point, they did not tour to support that album. That could have gotten them into the States. It could have gotten them on, I'm thinking of Don Kirshner's rock concert, the In concert, like the Dick Clark thing, like Kiss appeared on many times. It would have gotten them in front of American audiences. They could have gotten on a tour, but they went right back in the studio. And they ended up with their third album, Electric Jewels, which was the second of their albums that only came out in Canada. Now, a lot of die-hard April Wine fans, longtime fans, will point to Electric Jewels as their favorite album. And it's a pretty cool little album. It's still kind of eclectic, but you are inching more towards the sound that they would become known for, most notably because by now all of the Henmans have left. All of those folky influencers are gone. So you've got Myles Goodwyn, and then you've got a guy named Jim Clench who joined on the second album on bass and co-lead vocals. And then on another guitar, you've got Gary Moffat. On the drums, you've got Jerry Mercer. So now you've got three guys that are in the best-known lineup. So it's starting to take shape as far as the lineup that most people would know. But again, that album didn't come out in the States for whatever reason. Then they put out a live album, which only came out in Canada. Then they put out Stand Back, which is probably their first, I'm going to say it's their first really, really good album. Stand Back was a huge success here in Canada. I think it's a double platinum album at least.
Can you clarify something? Because I read it was double platinum, selling over 200,000 copies. Is Canada different on the measurement scale?
Yes, absolutely. If you think about population, our record sales are a tenth of US record sales. So 50,000 copies of a record sold as gold and 100,000 is platinum.
Yeah, because in the US,
it's 10 times that.
Yeah, US 500,000 gold,
Yeah.
1 million platinum.
It's simply based on population, right? We don't have anywhere near the population. So if you sell 1 million albums, if you sell 1 million of copies of one album in Canada, that's a diamond album. Whereas you have to sell 10 million in the US to get a diamond album.
Interesting.
So yeah, but no matter how you look at it, it was a big album, and it had several radio hits on it. And one of the all-time April Wine anthems, Ooh What a Night, comes off of Stand Back, opens the album. Unfortunately, that's an album that, again, it came out on Big Tree Records, which was a very, very small division of Atlantic Records, or was distributed by Atlantic Records. About the only other group I can think of that was on Big Tree Records that had any success was England Dan and John Ford Coley, who had a lot of, like, they get played on the yacht rock stations now, right? Like they had, like, I'd Really Love to See You Tonight, Nights Are Forever, and songs like that. But Stand Back, it got reissued in the US in the early 80s on Atlantic. You can find Atlantic versions of it. And I always look at it and think, boy, it's too bad they weren't on Atlantic from the get-go, because they might have had, because this is a huge album in Canada. It's one of the first ones people talk about. It's the four guys in the band standing behind a cannon. And for somebody like me that goes to a lot of record shows and does a lot of crate digging, I see Stand Back all the time. So obviously that record got into a lot of homes in Canada. Unfortunately, wasn't the case in the States. But they kept on going. There was a lineup change. Jim Clench left. They got a guy named Steve Lang in on bass. Again, we're inching closer to the best-known lineup. They put out an album called The Whole World's Going Crazy, which was a #1 record here in Canada. It shipped platinum based on how successful Stand Back was, but it didn't have the staying power. It's just not as good a record as Stand Back. It's okay, and I think you're in that chapter.
Yes, that and the following chapter.
Yeah, then it really gets eclectic with, again, another record that didn't get released in the States forever for now. And one of the reasons that didn't get released in the States is because some of those songs ended up on the US version, the international version of The Whole World's Going Crazy. If it sounds a little confusing, it's all in the book. Then they do something that got them a little bit of notoriety, because they ended up opening a week's worth of club shows for a band called the Cockroaches in 1977 at this famous club in Toronto called the El Macambo. Well, the Cockroaches were the Rolling Stones incognito. And so that was commemorated with a second April Wine live album called Live at the El Macombo. Parts of that show came out on the Rolling Stones' Love You Live. And I think in recent years, the entire El Macombo Stones performance was released. I'm not 100% sure about that. But yeah, that was very high prestige. It didn't do anything for them long term, but obviously it's a memory those guys will always have, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
cool story.
they got to they were the cover that, you know, people were coming to see them, but ladies and gentlemen, the Rolling Stones, right, in this small little club.
Right.
Um,
By the way, what's the story behind the name April Wine?
to me, it was just they're throwing words around. It really doesn't mean anything. It just seemed to have a ring to it, and I can only guess that the reason, or the fact that they were called April Wine is the reason why that first album cover has such a terrible album cover with just a pair of feet on it. Because of course, you know, you can stomp grapes with your feet to make wine.
Well,
But other than that, I have no idea. It has a ring to it. And I will say that it was around this time too, that in 1978, a couple of things happened. They signed a worldwide deal with capital EMI. So that meant they had one label all over the world. And this was the first time that this had happened. They also got a fifth member in the band, Brian Greenway, who was another guitar player. He could also sing and he played harmonica. So now they have the five-piece lineup that most people would know, recognize as April Wine, these five guys. And Brian was a huge asset because now they had three lead guitar players, and they would use those three lead guitar players to great advantage. Anybody that's heard Roller and knows that song, you've got the it goes back and forth, and it's awesome every time. I can never get tired of that. So, and they made a decision to kind of put the pedal down a little bit. They were never a metal band, but they decided to rock a little harder and concentrate on that rather than be as eclectic as they had been in the past. That's one of the things that makes Stand Back such a good record, because it's pretty much a rocking record all the way through. I think that's why that's so beloved. But so yeah, they put First Glance out. Now, it was not a hit right away. And it took about a year, but there was a radio station in Flint, Michigan. And I love these stories because they don't happen anymore because of radio chains and stuff. But this one station in Flint, Michigan started playing Roller and started getting requests for it. Next thing you know, Capitol starts putting some marketing muscle behind the album. They're opening for Rush. They're opening for Styx. You know, they're getting out there in front of a bunch of people. First Glance is probably one of those albums that's teetering on gold, and maybe if there was a recertification, maybe gold, because Roller was a top 40 single. It was
top 40, yeah, 34.
Yeah, second of three top 40 singles they had in the States. Obviously, in Canada, there were quite a few more. So that kind of set them on their way. And not wanting, and the other thing that happened with the US release of First Glance, because it originally came out in Canada with what I think is kind of a crappy cover, but in the US they put a cool like van shot, and they also, somebody came up with what I think is one of the coolest band logos ever. I've always really liked the April Wine logo. So that's their identification, right? They follow that up with Harder Faster at the end of 1979, which, like I said, was a gold record in the States. That's one of their most beloved albums. I Like to Rock was a radio hit. It wasn't a successful single, but it was a radio hit. Rock radio was playing it. That album also contains their cover of King Crimson's 21st Century Schizoid Man, which I absolutely love. And so they were getting over to the UK and playing. Then actually, that's right. They played at the Castle Donington in 1980. So anybody that has that album, that Castle Donington album, it's got a couple of Rainbow songs. It's got a couple Scorpion songs, and it's got a live version of I Like to Rock. So they actually are on that album. Then they followed up in 1981 with their biggest album, The Nature of the Beast. That's a platinum record in the US. It had Just Between You and Me, which was their biggest single in the States. I think it went to number 24, 23, something like that. And then Sign of the Gypsy Queen, which wasn't a top 40 single, but it was probably their biggest rock radio hit. And that was a big album for them. They followed it up with Power Play in 82, which had a big Canadian hit called Enough Is Enough, but in the States, it didn't hit the top 40. That was their last big US tour, I think, too. And then in 84, they put out Animal Grace, which was not that successful. It only went gold in Canada, and they went on what was going to be their farewell tour at the time. And then they were pretty much dormant for 8 years. And then they reunited in a slightly different lineup in the early 90s. They put out a couple of records, and then unfortunately, since then, they only put out 2 more albums. There hasn't been an April Wine album in 20 years, but that's kind of their history. And along the way, they've never really left the radio airwaves in Canada. People still want to hear those songs.
Sure. And sadly, Myles passed in 2023.
Yeah, so we've lost a few members. Jim Clench, the second bassist they had, he passed away, I think, in 2010, and Steve Lang passed away after that. So they've lost two of their bass players. And then, at the end of 2023, Myles died. Myles was a lifelong diabetic. He suffered with that and balanced that with the touring life, which is not easy. But eventually he succumbed to it. And but the band soldiers on. And Brian Greenway, he's not an original member, but he's the senior member. And he leads the current version of that band today.
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases, and before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. Rewinding back to 76, I want to ask you about Myles, because you make this comment in the book. For the Whole World's Going Crazy, the B-side Goody Two Shoes was originally going to be the title of Myles Goodwyn's solo album.
Yes,
which morphed into
Forever for Now.
Right?
Forever for Now is a very, very eclectic album. I actually don't know how much the April Wine Band plays on it. I think it was an 11th hour decision to call it an April Wine album because though they weren't huge at this point, there was still more marketability in the name April Wine than Myles Goodwyn as a solo artist. So I don't think he was planning on leaving the band. I think he just wanted to do a solo album.
Oh, I got you.
I think he just wanted to get songs out of his system that didn't really fit the band format, and they didn't. You mean, you've heard the record. It doesn't sound...
And I agree. John Alapic, one of the contributors, said that Forever for Now should have been a Myles Goodwyn solo album.
But there was simply more marketability in calling it an April Wine album, although I don't know if there's two ways of looking at that. They got really lucky with that album in Canada because it had a song on it called You Won't Dance With Me, which is sort of like this 50s doo-wop ballad. And it became a huge hit in Canada. I think it was a top 5 single. And that drove the sales of that album. That's the only reason anybody bought that album. But it didn't do anything for their reputation. And like I said, it did not come out in the States. They took a couple songs from it and put them on The Whole World's Going Crazy, the London release that came out in most of the world. And I think that's one of the reasons, like when they did sign with Capitol, I would imagine the label had a lot to do with saying, okay, don't get weird on us. Just write some good rock songs.
On record, the April Wine album review, Tim Durling, the author. Roller was their breakthrough here in America, but I want to ask about I Like to Rock.
Mm-hmm.
That may be my favorite of all of them. Is this where all the pieces finally click for April Wine around this point?
Yeah. I mean, Roller was a good test run, or the First Glance album was a really good test run for this new lineup. Harder, Faster was the second album that this best known lineup did, and I think they're firing on all cylinders. It's not a long album; it's only got 8 songs on it, but I just think it's a killer from start to finish. Yeah, I Like to Rock is a minor, it's like a lot of the April Wine songs. It sounds like a 3-chord rock song, but it's actually more complicated. Once you break it down and actually start trying to figure out how to play it, it's got some tricky time signatures in it. They do that a lot. They would throw these little tricky things into it. It's got that cool midsection where it stops down and it's just got the bass and the bass drum. It does the little nod at the end where one guitar starts playing the riff to Day Tripper and then another guitar starts playing Satisfaction, and
I
they go
love that.
really well together. And then the third guitar just goes into the I Like to Rock theme.
Yeah, and that's cool. That's a nod to
Their
their
influences. Yeah.
roots, their influences.
And in later years, I've seen them do this. They'll actually do a bit of each of those songs before finishing up.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a great way to end the song. And that song's really well known here in the States.
Yeah, that was a big FM song here. And of course, the album, that's probably the main reason why that's a gold record in the States. So that was a big record for them. That's fairly easy one to find.
I'm trying to remember what the comments were on that song. I'm looking through the book to find on I
I
Like
think
to
most
Rock.
people generally like that song. And one thing I always like as someone who's also a big Rush fan, that album, both of those bands at that time were recording at a place called Le Studio, which was in Morin Heights, Quebec. And anyone who's seen the Rush videos for Tom Sawyer or Limelight will recognize that room that they're playing in, but the windows are open and it's wintertime. But if you watch the I Like to Rock video, it's in the same room, but it's summertime. But you can tell that's the exact same room. I like that contrast. But and I also love both bands. But yeah, it's a great song. I mean, it's one of those you'll never go to an April Wine show and not hear I Like to Rock.
Yeah, you say here, I Like to Rock is a minor epic.
Yeah, I say minor because it's like 4.5 minutes and change. It's not an overly long song, but it goes through a lot of changes in its duration.
Harder, Faster, platinum in Canada, gold in the US. 81's The Nature of the Beast. First platinum selling album in the US, 2 times platinum in Canada. 64 in the US, 25 in Canada. Just Between You and Me, that's another big one.
Myles was really good at writing ballads. Like he could write rock songs, but he could write ballads. But one thing about Just Between You and Me I've always loved is like there's no piano or keyboards in that song. There's no acoustic guitar. It's all electric guitars all the way through.
One thing that struck me in this chapter is that after nearly a decade of grinding it out, April Wine finally has a platinum album here in America, but this would mark their peak commercially. Do you think The Nature of the Beast represents a success story or a missed opportunity for a band that could have become even bigger?
Well, that's a weird one. I mean, I totally think it's deserving of being, of its success. I just feel like it's again a recertification. It might have sold more because there's never been any certifications done on April Wine in the US according to RIA.com since 1982. So, has it sold another million? Because I know that I know I've heard Sign of the Gypsy Queen and Just Between You and Me on US radio in the 90s, at least. So those songs still get some airplay. So it just seems to me like they should have sold more. It feels like they sold more than they're actually been, credited for. They're not the only band that's happened to.
Well, that happened with First Glance, right? It may have actually sold enough.
First Glance may or may
US.
not be a gold record. The fact that it had Roller on it, I find it hard to believe that's not a gold record.
Right.
If it's not, it's got to be right on the doorstep of it,
But
like
doesn't that oversight just capture April Wine's career? Like just hugely successful, incredibly respected, but somehow still underrated outside of Canada.
And even in Canada, they're one of those bands that they've got a back catalog which hasn't gotten the TLC that it deserves, in my opinion. Most classic bands, at least their biggest period is there's reissues, with bonus tracks and the like. In April Wine's case, they have at least 6 songs that were B-sides over the years, 6 completely different songs that didn't appear on any one of their albums, that if you don't have the 45 that they were on, that's the only place that they exist. They've never been on any of the CD issues of the albums that the singles came off of. There are live songs that have been released as B-sides that have never been officially released on CD. There are alternate mixes of April Wine songs. They're a band that I don't know who owns their catalog now, but it's in dire need of a another look, a refit. And it's just a shame because there's a lot of good stuff there. I mean, you could almost just put out a single disc of B-sides, alternate mixes, and live tracks that have never been on a CD before, never even been on a cassette before. And I think people would, diehard fans would be like, finally, not just another compilation of songs that I've already got. So it's just a shame that it's kind of the catalog's kind of, in my opinion, languishing.
Yeah, and you want it to be easily accessible for people to find it.
People might criticize somebody like Jimmy Page because how many times has he gone back to the well and reissued all those Zeppelin albums? But April Wine needs somebody like that.
But it's introducing it to a new generation.
Yeah.
So the generation that's already aware of it, they can say that, but they're ignoring the fact that there's a whole younger generation of fans that have never listened to these albums.
Yeah.
That's why you do it. You reintroduce the music, So if somebody came to you and said, I only have time to listen to one April Wine album on a road trip, would you hand them Harder, Faster, or would you still point them to The Nature of the Beast, and why?
Oh, I'd give them Harder, Faster.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd give them Harder, Faster. I think Harder, Faster is percentage-wise the better album. I think Nature of the Beast is a great album. I just think that Harder, Faster is more direct. It's more concise. And, if you listen to that album and you don't like it, I don't think there's any need to go any further.
Okay.
I just think Harder, Faster it's probably the best distillation of why people talk about April Wine. They're just a great rock band. It's one of their heavier albums too. And it does make for a good car trip.
Thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. 1982's Power Play features Enough Is Enough and Tell Me Why. Both did well on the charts, peaked at 34 in Canada, 62 in the US, respectable number, went platinum in Canada. Couldn't reach gold in the US, but still did well. And then from there, 1984's Animal Grace, 34 in Canada, 62 in the US. Walking Through Fire in 85, 174 in the US, didn't chart in Canada. If The Nature of the Beast was April Wine's commercial peak, what do Power Play, Animal Grace, and Walking Through Fire reveal about the band's determination to keep evolving rather than simply trying to recreate past success?
Well, Power Play, I think Enough Is Enough is a dynamite single. It went all the way to 11 in Canada. It's one of their radio staples, and it's still one of their best-known songs here. It peaked at 50 in the US, which is interesting. That tells me it got a fair bit of airplay. And I know the video got played on MTV. It's a silly video, like a lot of early 80s videos. They're driving around in a semi, and Myles is singing into the CB at one point. But I think it's a great song. The problem is with Power Play, it's a much lighter album than Harder, Faster, or Nature of the Beast. They took the foot off the accelerator just a little bit. There are some rockers on that album, but there's an awful lot of mellow stuff, or just poppier stuff. And I don't think they had a slam dunk follow-up second single. Like if Enough Is Enough was Just Between You and Me, they didn't have a sign of Gypsy Queen on Power Play. I think it's probably sold, I'm going to guess about 300,000 copies in the States. That's another one that I've been told you see quite a few copies of that. It still went platinum in Canada, but it didn't keep the momentum going. And I really don't understand why, because it's not like there's a long gap. So Nature of the Beast came out in January of 1981. Power Play came out in April of 1982. They weren't out of the scene very long, and they had a new album out. So who knows? And I think if that album had at least gone gold, there might have been more, they might have gotten more of a foot in the ground, a foothold in the US, but they just didn't hold on to it for that long. Animal Grace, now I have a soft spot for Animal Grace, but I would never send someone to listen to that album first, because the first thing they're going to say is it sounds incredibly dated, especially the drums. It's got that sort of Pyromania-esque drum sound without everything else that made that album amazing. Now I think there's a
Is
few
this their
decent.
Judas Priest turbo? Is this their
Maybe.
the
Yeah,
cover
that
looks
might.
like you
Yeah,
look at the cover,
yeah,
it's got
yeah.
that.
Well, okay. Here's another problem I have is that, like I said, they've got one of the coolest logos and they don't use it.
Yeah.
Kansas did the same thing with Audio Visions and or not Audio Visions, but Vinyl Confessions and Drastic Measures. You've got a logo, use it. But they didn't use it for this. I don't think there's anything wrong with the cover concept, but yeah, it's very electronic sounding. It's the last album that those five guys were on. They weren't getting along, and there were no big singles off that album. Even though the first track on that album and the first single, "This Could Be the Right One," I think could have been a hit. I think it peaked at 58 in the U.S. It's got a really expensive looking video that doesn't make a lot of sense. But Walking Through Fire is another story altogether because at the end of 84, like during 84, April Wine basically toured Canada one last time and called it a day. But but Miles owed Capitol one more record. Now, that's the only reason Walking Through Fire exists. It is your stereotypical contractual obligation album. Brian Greenway is credited, but there's not a lot of guitar on it. It's very keyboardy. There's three other guys credited on keyboards, bass, and drums. I don't think there's live drums on any of the tracks. It sounds like a drum machine on the entire album to me, and it sounds incredibly dated to new ears. Now, I still think there are some decent songs in there, and I think Miles' vocals are fantastic, good as they've ever been. But there was no way that was going to reverse their fortunes at this point. There was no tour to support it, and it was basically put out simply to honor that Capitol contract. And then that was it. But I mean, in Canada, their label Aquarius Records knew that this band, you know, had a legacy and they put out countless compilations. Again, they never got those B-sides, but they knew people would buy once CDs were a thing. They put out all kinds of these CDs, these CD compilations in the late 80s. So like I said, their music has always been kind of on around, even when the band wasn't actively around. In 1988, Myles Goodwyn did do a for real solo album. It was just self-titled. And so did Brian Greenway. But it was pretty quiet on the April Wine front until they reunited in about 92. But I think if Power Play had been a bigger album, I mean, one thing leads to the other, right? I mean, it would have restored some confidence. I don't think there was a lot of confidence. The label wasn't confident in the band anymore. And, other bands were coming out, right? There's always new bands to take the attention.
Sure. Sure. Well, and then you have 93 when they came back with Attitude, the grunge era. Did they release a good album at exactly the wrong moment in rock history? Should they have waited?
Well, waited, or if they'd put that album out in 90 or 91, I think that would have been a really, really big comeback for them because as it stands, they had a gold record in Canada with Attitude, which is pretty impressive for a band that had been out of the scene that long and in the height of grunge put out a record that still managed to go gold. The problem is that they did not secure a US deal. And that's a shame because that's the point where I got on board with the band. I'd heard of them, obviously, but that's where I got into the band. It's a hard rocking album, and I still really enjoy it. And there are songs on there that did not sound out of place on the radio in 93. There's a lot of drop tuning on it, but it's a really good, strong rock album. And it's just a shame that it's sort of like it just never got a US release, nor did its follow-up Frigate, which came out the next year. And those are the only two records they did in the 90s. And then it was just tour, 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 tour. And then mostly in Canada, right? It was mostly a Canadian thing. They never really got any big US tours until recent years.
And then Back to the Mansion, 2001, roughly speaking, in 06. If someone's looking to explore the April Wine catalog beyond the hits, which later album would you recommend first?
Back to the Mansion is a great album. Back to the Mansion is just a fine latter day April Wine album, and it's one that I like more now than when it came out. Not that I didn't like it when it came out. When that album came out, it was the year my daughter was born, so I didn't have I wasn't able to enjoy, I'd buy the albums, but I wasn't able to give them the time. But as the years have gone by, I'm like, boy, this is really, really, really good. Now, roughly speaking, it's a weak way to end a career because it's mostly it's a very bluesy album, but it's very short. The whole album is about 25 minutes long. It's practically an EP. Now, I like the way they recorded it. It's very live off the floor. I just wish there were more songs on it, and I just wish they had done more music because Myles was such a great songwriter. And it seems to me that they could have done the albums on the cheap because I think he's got his own studio, but it just didn't happen for whatever reason. I would love to eventually find out, oh, by the way, there's an unreleased album that was going to come out in, I don't know, 2012 or something. But for now, we've got what we've got, and it's a solid catalog. I just wish there was more latter-day stuff.
Yeah, and Myles passed in 2023. What do you think his greatest contribution to rock music was? Great songwriter, great vocalist, great
Yeah.
guitarist, or all of the above.
Yeah, Myles was a talented guy. He wasn't a virtuoso, but he just had a knack for writing simple rock songs that sounded good in front of lots of people, that were easy to remember and had memorable hooks. And yeah, he was one of the greats, and it's too bad. He died way too young, and but and I don't, we'll get into this. I mean, I was kind of skeptical when I found out that the band was continuing with another vocalist, at least for touring. And I write in my epilogue that I got to see this lineup open for the reunited Triumph. And I realized that, you know what? These songs, people love these songs. And with Brian Greenway at the helm, the legacy of April Wine is in good hands. And I would go see this lineup of April Wine by themselves now, where I wouldn't have before.
You Open My Eyes is the title of the epilogue.
Yeah, which is the name of one of their early songs, but I always like to tie in things like that. But it is true. I liked being proven wrong. I would never ever go online and say something like no Myles, no April Wine, because I hate reading stuff like that because it's just dumb. Who cares? Who cares what one person thinks? Nobody. And also it doesn't matter because there's people, when I realized that when they came on stage and the trade-off for not playing a full set was that now they're opening for Triumph in bigger venues than they played in years, in Canada and the US. So in lieu of playing a full set, they put together a set that was just hit after hit after hit after hit, and it worked. It was just everybody knew every song, and you could hear people singing along with every song. And Mark Parent, who's the guy
he's the new singer.
He's the new singer, and he also plays guitar. He doesn't sound anything like Myles, so they did not go down the route of bands like Journey or Foreigner and say, we got to get a guy that sings just the same as our previous singer. They just got someone who could sing the songs really well. And that's what they've got. And like I said, these songs, the legacy of this band is in good hands now.
The Booked on Rock podcast is part of the Boneless Podcasting Network. If you're a fan of classic rock and classic film like I am, go to boneless.lovable.app to find over 20 great shows there. That's boneless.lovable.app, or just go to bookedonrock.com, the Boneless Podcasting Network. It is what you want it to be. Listen with confidence. All right, we're going to finish with a lightning round. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Most underrated April Wine album.
Underrated. I'm going to go with Power Play because I think it's a better album than most people give it credit for, even though I did say it was lighter. Didn't say it wasn't good. There's a lot of good songs on it.
Most underrated song.
I'm going to go with This Could Be the Right One from Animal Grace. I think that is a super catchy single. It didn't even do well up here in Canada, but if you listen through that dated production, there's a really good song in there.
Favorite Myles Goodwyn lyric.
Oh boy. I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's coming to mind right now. There's a song on Nature of the Beast called Wanna Rock, which says, if it don't rock me, then it ain't going to please me.
Okay. That's a tattoo right there.
Yeah.
Favorite guitar solo.
I'm going to go with Enough is Enough. because number one, I think it's a cool little guitar solo. It's just a pentatonic solo. Number two, I can almost play it.
Okay. Best album opener.
I'm going to go with What a Night from Stand Back.
Best album closer.
I think about what closes all of the albums. I'm going to go with 21st Century Schizoid Man.
Cool. Best ballad.
Well, it's pretty hard to beat Just Between You and Me, but I'm not going to say that one. I'm going to say a song on Stand Back called I Wouldn't Want to Lose Your Love. Beautiful piano ballad.
All right. Best hard rocker.
So when best album opener, I was thinking, well, I got to say I Like to Rock, but best hard rock, I'm going to use I Like to Rock for best hard rocker because it's a killer.
Okay. Best live album.
One for the Road from 1985. It's the band at the peak of their powers, I'd say. Second to that is a King Biscuit Flower Hour CD that came out in 1999. It's a 1982 show from the Power Play Tour in Wichita, Kansas, and it's great too.
Cool. I miss listening to those King Biscuit Flower Hour on FM.
Look for the April Wine one. It's really good.
All right. Last question. One April Wine song everyone should hear before they die. And hopefully that's not anytime soon.
Yeah. I'm going to go with a song off the Frigate album in 94 called Driving with My Eyes Closed, because that is a really, really cool song.
All right. So you went with a deep track.
Yes.
Okay. On record, the April Wine album review out now. Find it wherever books are sold. Amazon.
Amazon.
Amazon's.
There's a few bookstores here and there that have them, but they're very specific spots. So Amazon has it no matter where you live in the world.
And we can find all the rest of your books there.
Yeah.
Books on Sammy Hagar, Fleetwood Mac,
YT, Night
Ranger,
8 tracks.
The 8-track book, Kansas.
Yeah. It's my 7th book. It's pretty crazy, man.
Yeah, man. You are. Yeah. And it's cool. I remember last summer you asked me to be part of this book. And I remember, writing them up, sending them over to you, and you've been working hard throughout the year, and here it is. It's out.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do we got playing next?
Oh, more, you know what? I'm going to say more of the same. I'm not going to, the Fleetwood Mac one is probably as far afield as I'm going to go. I stick to my, melodic 70s, 80s rock. So I've got another book that's pretty much written, just needs put together. I want to let this one run its course as long as I can, but that one's next. And then after that, I've got another panel book in mind.
Cool. And where can people find you online? You got your YouTube channel.
Yeah. Best thing is to go to timsvinylconfessions.com. That's my link tree. So that if you go there, like I rent the URL on a yearly basis, but I created a link tree. So it's got links to all of my socials and all of my books.
Perfect. All right. Tim Durling, thank you so much again for coming on. Thank you for having me part of this book. That's quite an honor, sir. And I love having you on, man. I know we always have great conversations, and we are Zoom cursed. We've had some Zoom curses, but we get through.
This was actually pretty decent.
Yeah, only a few freezes here and there, but we got through it. So.
It's bound to be one or two. That's just how it is. Yeah.
All right, Tim. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Eric.
That's it. It's in the books.